She came to escape her past, but destiny had other plans. What began as the worst day of her life would soon open a door to a world she never imagined, a world of power, truth, healing, and a second chance at everything she thought she'd lost. Asterisk. Ava Morgan tugged her coat tighter around her as she stepped off the shuttle bus. A chill wind slicing through the Colorado air like a blade. Snowflakes danced like feathers from a torn pillow, and her boots crunched against the icy walkway leading up to the towering Black Ridge Mountain Retreat, a glass-walled luxury estate nestled at the foot of the Rockies. Her breath fogged the air in short bursts as she pushed open the glass door and stepped inside. Warmth rushed over her, lavender, oil and cedarwood wafted from hidden diffusers, and golden light reflected off polished marble floors. A fireplace roared near the lobby, illuminating the wooden beams of the vaulted ceiling with a cozy glow. This wasn't a vacation, this was an escape, and she needed it 2 weeks ago. Ava had finalized the divorce papers from a 10-year marriage that had chipped away at her self-worth and crushed her creative soul. Once a best-selling novelist, she hadn't written a single sentence in over 2 years. The spark was gone. Her life, hollow. This retreat, a last-minute writing escape, funded by a scholarship she'd barely qualified for, was her one shot at starting over. But fate, it seemed, had one more twist in store. Reservation for Morgan, she told the receptionist, adjusting her backpack and forcing a polite smile. The woman behind the desk, pretty, with tight curls and anxious eyes, typed rapidly on her keyboard, then froze. A tiny frown formed. Miss Morgan, I'm afraid there's been a bit of a situation. Ava's heart sank. Situation? Your room. It's been double booked. Ava stared blankly. That has to be a mistake. I confirmed it twice. I have the email right here. I believe you. The receptionist cut in quickly, lowering her voice. But because of the Investors Summit being held in the East Wing, the resort is at full capacity. Every room is taken. So what does that mean? I have nowhere to stay. Ava's voice wavered. The exhaustion of travel, heartbreak, and snowstorm breaking through. The receptionist glanced around, then leaned in. Their single quotes s. One option. Highly unorthodox. Ava raised an eyebrow. The penthouse suite. It has 2 separate bedrooms. One of our long-term VIP clients checked in this morning, and his assistant, after a long negotiation, agreed to let someone else stay in the second room under strict conditions. What conditions? She slid a document across the desk. A confidentiality agreement, non-disclosure. You'll have no access to his side of the suite, no interference in his schedule, and you must maintain discretion during your stay. Ava hesitated. Who is he? The receptionist hesitated to, then whispered, Ethan Cole. Ava's stomach dropped. The Ethan Cole, the billionaire who rebuilt his company after his brother's scandal. The man who never gives interviews, never shows up in public. That's the one. A pause. I'll take it, Ava said, signing the form. 20 minutes later, Ava stood outside the elevator doors leading to the top floor. Her suitcase containing the last of her carefully folded life felt heavier than usual. As the elevator chimed open, her heart pounded in her chest. Was she really about to live in a suite with one of the world's most powerful and mysterious men? The doors opened. The penthouse was breathtaking. Floor 2 ceiling. Windows framed the mountain peaks like a living painting. A fire crackled in a sunken living area. The decor was modern but warm, stone, glass, and rich oak textures blending together like something out of an architectural dream. And then a voice. Deep.com, controlled. You must be the roommate. Ava turned sharply. There he stood, Ethan Cole, barefoot, dressed in a soft grey cashmere sweater and tailored joggers, holding a cup of tea. He looked nothing like the business magazine covers. His hair was tousled. His face carried the shadows of exhaustion. Or maybe loneliness. His green eye, sharp and unreadable, rested on her, like he was scanning data she didn't know she carried. I'm Ava, she said awkwardly, gripping her suitcase handle. I'm aware, he replied. You talk in your sleep, I assume. Ava blinked. What a joke, he said. Mostly. She raised an eyebrow. I won't be in your way, she added. I'll stay in my room. I'm just here to write. He nodded once. The guest room's on the left. It overlooks the valley. You'll like the view. Thank you, she murmured, making her way down the hall. Behind her, he added quietly, sometimes the view is the only thing that keeps you sane. That night, Ava lay awake, watching snow fall through the massive window in her room. The house was quite eerily so. She thought she'd hear music, calls, business chatter, but it was silent. Around midnight, she heard footsteps. She tiptoed into the hallway and saw Ethan standing alone in the kitchen, drinking straight from a wine bottle and staring out at the mountains. There was something broken about the way he stood there. Not angry, not drunk, just lost. She almost asked if he was okay, but she didn't. She returned to bed, unaware that Ethan Cole had heard her footsteps, and that the next morning their lives would begin to intertwine in ways neither of them ever expected. Ava stared at the folded note on the floor for a full minute before picking it up. She read it once, then again. Writer to writer. Let's trade stories over breakfast. Bring your honesty. Cole's handwriting was precise, elegant, even. It didn't match the sharp, unreadable man from the night before, the man who'd barely said 2 sentences, the man who looked at her like she was an equation he didn't have time to solve. But something about the note pulled at her. Maybe it was the words. Maybe it was the silence behind them. She set the paper on her desk, closed her laptop without writing a word, and walked quietly toward the kitchen. Ethan was already there. He stood barefoot on the heated tile floor, flipping something in a skillet with surprising ease. He was still in the same soft sweater, sleeves pushed up to his elbows, and for a moment, he didn't even look up when she entered. Just said, "You're late." I considered rescinding the invitation. I didn't realize it was time sensitive, she replied. "It's not," he said, finally turning toward her. "But it's good to know you're not one of those writers who wakes up at dawn and writes 1,000 words before breakfast." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Do you know many writers?" "Just one. My mother," he said simply, setting 2 plates on the counter. "She wrote memoirs no one ever read, but she believed words could rebuild broken worlds." Ava blinked. That wasn't in any article she'd ever read about Ethan Cole. She sat slowly at the marble island while he slid a plate toward her. Scrambled eggs, fresh berries, 2 slices of sourdough toast. Her stomach growled before she could say thank you. "You cook?" she asked. He shrugged. "My assistant left early this morning for a summit meeting. She usually feeds me, but I figured I could manage eggs. They're perfect. You haven't even tasted them. I trust the presentation." A beat passed. Then he said, "You're not what I expected." Ava paused mid-bite. "And what exactly did you expect?" "Someone older. Maybe someone who'd come here for networking, to pitch a book. Someone who'd see me and try to use me." "I didn't ask to stay here," she said quietly. "I know. That's why I wrote the note." He poured her coffee without asking if she wanted any, and for a second, the silence between them shifted, less awkward, more curious. Ava studied him over the rim of her mug. He looked tired, but not in the usual way. Not like someone who stayed up too late reading spreadsheets. It was the kind of tired that came from carrying something invisible. "You mentioned your mother was a writer," she said carefully. He nodded, but didn't elaborate. Instead, he turned the question back. "What, do you write children's books, really?" She braced for sarcasm, but none came. "Yeah, I used to write chapter books for kids, aged 7 to 10. A little fantasy, a little life lesson. I haven't written in 2 years. He didn't ask why, just nodded once, like he understood. She hated how much that meant. They ate quietly after that. No more questions, no unnecessary words, just the mountain light filtering through the windows and the strange sense that something new was shifting in the room, something unspoken and fragile. Later that day, Ava sat in the sunroom with her laptop open and the cursor blinking on a blank page. Still nothing came. She was about to close the lid when she heard a soft sound, like piano keys being pressed. One by one, she followed the sound down the hall, unsure if she was intruding. At the far end of the suite, a set of double doors had been left slightly open. Inside was a study sunlit, filled with books and tall windows. And in the corner, Ethan sat at a grand piano, his back to her, playing something soft, almost haunting. Ava froze in the doorway. She hadn't expected this. The cold, unreachable billionaire she thought she'd be living alongside had somehow turned into a man who played music alone in a quiet room. A man who cooked breakfast and remembered his mother's forgotten words. She didn't want to interrupt, but he spoke without turning around. "You can come in." "I didn't mean to pry," she said quickly. "You weren't." She stepped inside cautiously. The walls were lined with books, first editions, poetry collections, philosophy, science, and a surprising number of fiction titles. She spotted a worn copy of a children's classic among them. "You read this?" she asked, picking it up. "My sister did," he replied. "She used to read it to me when we were kids." "You don't talk about your family much, do you?" He stopped playing, his fingers resting on the keys. "No, I don't. I'm sorry, it's fine," he said. "I just don't like telling stories that haven't healed yet." That line stuck with her for the rest of the day. That evening, she wrote the first paragraph of a new story. It wasn't for kids. It wasn't for anyone. Really, it was for herself. A story about a woman who believed she had nothing left inside her, and a stranger who reminded her that even quiet hearts carry thunder. Later, she found another note, this time taped to the inside of her bedroom door. It simply read, "Keep writing. We all need someone brave enough to tell the truth." For the first time in 2 years, Ava smiled without effort, because somehow, in the most unlikely place, surrounded by snow and silence, a man she didn't understand had seen the part of her she thought was gone forever. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing. She wasn't invisible anymore, and neither was he. The rain started that night, not outside, but in Ava's dream, a slow, misty downpour that soaked the pavement of her childhood street. She was running barefoot, her younger self chasing something she couldn't quite see. Every time she got close, it vanished. She woke up with a gasp, her fingers clenched around her bedsheet, her heart racing. It wasn't the dream that unsettled her, it was the feeling she'd had right before she woke. The sense that someone had found her, seen her, not the version she presented to the world, but the real her, the one she'd buried under years of pretending she was fine. When she stepped into the living room later that morning, Ethan was already there, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the fireplace with a notebook in hand, scribbling something furiously. He didn't look up when she entered. "You're writing," she said, surprised. He flipped a page. "I do, occasionally. You said you weren't a writer." "I said I wasn't a published writer. There's a difference." She smiled, sitting on the armrest of a nearby couch. "So what do you write?" He looked up then, eyes steady. "Letters I never send. Endings I never finish." A pause hung between them. "I used to do that too," Ava admitted. "Write to people who left, or two versions of myself I didn't want to forget. Did it help? Sometimes. Other times, it just reminded me how far I'd fallen." He closed the notebook and stood. "That's why we keep writing. To build the bridge back to ourselves." The words landed harder than she expected. There was something about the way he spoke, like everything he said had already been tested by fire and still survived. That afternoon, he invited her to walk the forest trail behind the retreat. They didn't talk much at first. The snow was soft beneath their boots, and the pines whispered in the wind like old storytellers. As they reached a frozen creek, Ava finally broke the silence. "Why are you really here, Ethan?" He didn't answer right away. Then, after a long pause, "I walked away from everything 2 months ago. I told my board I needed time, but the truth is, I didn't know who I was anymore. You're one of the most successful men in the world. That's just the version of me they know. The curated one. The one who signs deals and shakes hands. And the real you." He looked out at the mountains. "The real me is tired, haunted by choices, and still waiting for the moment when it all stops feeling borrowed." Ava didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence said what words couldn't. "I understand." When they returned to the suite, the sun was beginning to set behind the peaks, casting golden light through the windows. Ethan poured tea while Ava flipped open her laptop. Surprised by the words already forming in her head, she began writing a story about a woman who found her voice in the echoes of someone else's silence. A woman who met a man who had everything and nothing all at once, and how their truths collided in the quietest of places, turning grief into growth and walls into windows. She didn't notice the hours passing. Ethan didn't interrupt. He sat across from her, reading something handwritten, lips barely moving. At one point, he reached for a pen and circled a line, then crossed it out, then rewrote it. Ava had never known stillness like this. Not just the absence of noise, but the presence of peace. As night fell, he looked up and said, "You know, I haven't told anyone this, but I used to want to be a teacher." She blinked. "Really? My sister was the only one who believed in it. Said I had a gift for breaking complicated things into smaller pieces." "What happened?" "She died." The words were flat, final, but his eyes weren't. They shimmered with pain he wasn't trying to hide anymore. Ava set her laptop aside and walked over. She sat on the rug beside him, not too close, not too far. I lost someone too, she said. Not to death, but to life. My husband, ... He left, even while he stayed. Ethan nodded once. That kind of loss is quieter, but it lingers longer. Used to think I'd never be whole again. Maybe we're not meant to be what we were, he said softly. Maybe we become something better. They sat there, two people stripped of pretense, surrounded by shadows and snowfall and the flicker of truth. Ava closed her eyes for a moment and let the warmth sink in, not from the fire, but from the fact that someone saw her, not her resume, not her mask. Her. When she returned to her room that night, another note waited under her door. This one read, "You said once you were empty, but empty things echo, and echoing things carry voices. Don't be afraid of the sound." She held the paper to her chest and let the tears come quiet. Real, unburdening. Because for the first time in a long time, ... she didn't feel alone. Snow fell in the early hours of morning, quiet and soft like a secret the world was trying to keep. The mountain landscape disappeared beneath a white blanket, and in the hush that followed, Ava found herself wide awake, sitting on the floor of her room, knees tucked to her chest, heart stirring with something she hadn't felt in years. Restlessness, but not the anxious kind. The kind that whispered you're close to something true. She stared at the last note Ethan had written, the way his words had held her, like a hand reaching through the fog. She didn't know what scared her more, that he saw the parts of her she kept buried, or that he wasn't afraid of them. By the time she wandered into the kitchen, the sun was barely up, but Ethan was already there, pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. His jaw was tense. Whatever conversation he was having wasn't pleasant. "No, I said postpone the contract," he snapped. "Yes, I understand the cost, but there's something more important at stake." Ava paused in the doorway, unseen. "No," Ethan continued, "I'm not explaining myself again. If they can't wait, then maybe they don't deserve what I've built." There was a long silence, then a quiet, clipped goodbye. He set the phone down like it had betrayed him. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop," Ava said gently. "He didn't turn around. That was my coup. He thinks I've lost my mind." "Have you? A beat past?" "Maybe," he said, "but it's the first time in years it feels like my mind, not someone else's expectations." She smiled softly. "That sounds like progress." He finally turned to face her. His eyes were tired but clear, and then he said something she didn't expect. "Come with me." Ava blinked. "We're out, somewhere no one knows us." She hesitated. "Why?" "Because I don't want to forget this version of myself," he said. "And you're the only one who's met him." It wasn't romantic. It wasn't pressure. It was honest. And that's why she said yes. They drove in silence, winding down the mountain roads, the SUV tires crunching fresh snow. After nearly an hour, they arrived at a forgotten village tucked in a valley, a place so still it felt like it had been paused in time. Ethan led her to a small bookshop, dusty wooden, beautiful. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, and a kind-faced woman behind the counter greeted them like old friends. Ethan called her Margot, and Ava watched as the woman hugged him like he was a lost nephew returning home. "She's the only person I trust to recommend a book I haven't already read," he whispered. Margot led them to a corner shelf. Ava ran her fingers along the spines of old poetry collections, dog-eared novels, and yellowing pages. Each book felt like a survivor. And then she saw it, a children's book, her children's book, tucked between two classics, as if it belonged there. She froze. "How did this get here?" she whispered. Ethan glanced over. "I gave Margot a box of books a few months ago when I was cleaning out storage." "You bought my book?" she asked, stunned. "I didn't know it was yours. I just remembered reading it to my niece once and thinking, whoever wrote this understands more than they let on." Ava stared at him, something inside her shifting. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "Because back then, I didn't think you'd believe me," he said. "And now it just feels like part of the reason we met." They left the shop with 2 new books, a bag of lemon cookies, and a quiet sense that something unspoken was beginning to bloom. Later that evening, back at the suite, they sat by the fire again, but closer this time. The space between them no longer needed filling. "You ever wonder," Ava asked, "how many things had to go wrong for the right ones to happen?" "All the time," he replied. "I think about it every day. I lost everything before, I got here, she admitted. My marriage, my home, even my sense of who I was. I came to this retreat because I had nowhere else to go. I didn't come here to find peace or whatever this is, and yet you did, and yet I did, she echoed. A silence passed. Then Ethan said, maybe losing everything is how we make room for what really matters. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a folded letter. He handed it to her. This was the first thing I wrote after my sister passed, he said. I've never shown it to anyone. Ava opened the letter with trembling hands. It was raw, heartfelt, written by a man who once stood at the edge of himself and didn't jump but instead started walking back. When she finished reading, her eyes were wet. You should publish this, she whispered. He shook his head. I don't need the world to read it. I just needed you to. Ava didn't know what to say, so she leaned forward and hugged him, not like a lover, not like a friend, but like a mirror holding itself together. And for the first time, Ethan let himself be held, not because he was weak, but because he was ready. That night, she wrote again. Not a children's book, not a love story, a story about starting over, a story about the people we become when we stop pretending we're fine and start being honest about what hurts. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but she knew this. Some stories don't begin until after everything falls apart, and she was finally ready to live hers. Asterisk. The storm came in without warning, not the kind that rattled windows or brought thunder, but the kind that arrived with a single phone call, a voice from the outside world, reminding Ava and Ethan that their quiet escape wasn't built to last. Ethan's phone buzzed once. He stared at it for a long moment before answering. His voice shifted the moment he spoke, less warmth, more edge, like he was slipping back into armor. Yes, I understand. No, I haven't forgotten. Ava stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching his posture tighten, his expression close off. She could see it happening in real time, like a slow undoing of everything he'd become over the last few days. When he ended the call, he didn't speak right away. Bad news? She asked gently. He gave a short nod. The board is forcing an emergency vote. They want to replace me. She stepped closer. Why? Because I walked away. Because I chose silence over speed, reflection over revenue. You're the founder, the face of the company. That's exactly the problem, he said. They think I've changed. Have you? She asked quietly. He met her eyes, and something flickered behind his. I think I've finally started to. Ava wanted to reach for him, to tell him that transformation wasn't betrayal, that choosing his own peace over other people's pressure wasn't failure. But she also knew how deeply he'd built his identity around responsibility, around control. He ran a hand through his hair and exhaled. I have to go back, face them, prove I still care. Her heart thudded. When tomorrow, the word landed like a door slamming shut. He looked at her then, and there was a kind of apology in his eyes. The kind that comes when you have to choose between who you've always been and who you might still become. Ava nodded, even though everything inside her was screaming, stay. That evening, they didn't speak much. They shared dinner, a walk through the snow, a long moment on the balcony watching the stars, pretending the sky wasn't changing. When they returned to the suite, Ava found a note on her pillow, not typed, not written in Ethan's usual neat scrawl. This one was rushed, emotion in every line. You reminded me who I was before I became who the world demanded. If I lose everything tomorrow, it'll still be worth it because I found something better. You. She folded the paper with shaking hands, not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. The next morning he was gone. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence. It took everything in her not to break. She stayed in the suite for hours, trying to write, trying to breathe, trying not to check her phone. But every part of her felt like a puzzle missing its center. Was it foolish to believe a few days could matter that much? That two people carrying so much weight could ever help each other heal? But somewhere between grief and doubt, a new question appeared. What if that's exactly why it mattered? Not because they were perfect, but because they weren't. Because healing doesn't happen in the absence of pain. It happens when someone chooses to sit with you in it. And Ethan had done that. He had sat with her pain, and she had seen his. Late that night, she left the suite for the first time, wandering down into the main lodge. She passed other writers laughing near the fire, sipping warm drinks, telling stories. She felt like a ghost among them. Then she saw it on the message board outside the retreat office. A single printed flyer with bold text. Final night. Open. Reading. Share your words. Share your story. 8 p.m. Her first instinct was to walk away, but something inside her said no, because maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't about being left behind. Maybe it was about standing up when she stepped on stage that night. The lights were bright and the silence deafening, but she cleared her throat, opened her notebook, and read. She read about grief, about hiding, about losing yourself in someone else's expectations. She read about a man who taught her how to be still, and a moment, just when the world slowed down enough to let two people be honest. When she finished, there was silence, then applause, not wild, not overwhelming, but real. She returned to her room that night not feeling empty, but steady, as if for the first time her voice had weight. But as she opened her door, something stopped her cold. A suitcase, just inside, and sitting on the couch, looking like he hadn't slept in days, was Ethan. He stood up slowly. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I thought I had to. Ava's breath caught. He stepped closer. But the truth is, I'd rather lose a company than lose the only person who ever saw me. Not the brand, not the billionaire. Me. Tears prickled at her eyes. I walked into that boardroom today, he continued, and I told them the truth. That I'd built something powerful, but I'd forgotten to live. And if they couldn't respect that, I didn't belong there anymore. And she whispered, they voted. A pause. I walked away. Ava's hand flew to her mouth. You gave it all up. I gave up what I thought was everything, he said, voice soft. But I found something I never thought I'd have. She stepped forward. He met her halfway. And in that moment, there were no titles, no past, no masks, just two people choosing each other. Not because they had to, but because they finally believed they were worth choosing. Asterisk, the first morning they woke up truly together. Something was different, not dramatic, not cinematic. Just real. Ethan made coffee badly. Ava laughed as he spilled grounds across the counter. His usual calm precision replaced by an unfamiliar clumsiness that looked suspiciously like nerves. He muttered something about needing his assistant for even the simplest tasks, and she told him that maybe burnt toast was the most human thing about him yet. They ate on the balcony, wrapped in blankets, the snow on the mountains catching the sunrise like fire. It wasn't quiet. Birds sang, wind whispered, her heart still beat a little too fast, but it was peaceful, and for the first time in what felt like years, neither of them felt like they needed to fill the silence with anything but presence. It was, as Ava would later write, the kind of morning you never notice when it happens, but you remember for the rest of your life, because it was the first time she didn't wake up afraid, not of being alone, not of being forgotten, not of being too much, or not enough. She was just herself. And somehow, that had become enough. Ethan watched her as she scribbled in her notebook, hair falling over her face, sunlight warming her skin. She wasn't trying to be anything for anyone, not a character in a story, not an answer to someone else's question. She was writing for her. That was the moment. He knew he hadn't given anything up when he left the boardroom. He had finally taken something back. Ava noticed him staring. You look like someone who's about to make a terrible confession. He grinned. Depends. I want to build a life where we never need an itinerary. A terrible confession. Her eyebrows rose. You mean like a vacation? He shook his head. I mean like a home. She froze. The word landed in her chest like a stone in a still lake. I know it's fast, he added quickly. I know we met under weird, impossible, completely unrepeatable circumstances. But this, he gestured round them, is the first time I've ever wanted to stay still, because of you. She didn't say anything for a long moment, and then she said, you really burned the toast. They laughed, and then she kissed him. Not the kind of kiss that solves everything, the kind that starts something. That afternoon, they walked into town. No disguises, no need to hide. They held hands like two people who had earned the right to be soft with each other. They stopped at the bookshop again. Margot handed Ava a small wrapped package. Inside was her own book, but with a handwritten note, for the writer who stopped writing until she remembered she was the story. Ava blinked back tears. I want to do it again, she said later, sitting beside Ethan on a park bench. Right, but not just books. I want to tell real stories, stories like ours, about second chances, about letting go. Do it, he said, The world could use more of that, and so she did. 3 months later, Ava launched a podcast. Just a microphone and her voice and a small desk in their new place, a quiet cabin near the edge of a lake they'd stumbled across while chasing the sunset. She called it Quiet Turns. Each episode told one story. Stories about people who thought it was too late, who believed they were broken beyond repair, who lost everything and somehow, in the loss, uncovered the one thing they never knew they were looking for. Hope. It didn't go viral, it didn't make her famous, but it made people feel seen. And every time she doubted herself, Ethan would come in with coffee still terrible, wrap an arm around her shoulder, and remind her, they don't need you to be perfect, they need you to be real. Her first guest, Himi, talked about ambition, pressure, the weight of being everyone's answer and no one's question. He told the story of how he lost his company but found his peace. At the end, she asked, what would you say to the version of you from a year ago? Ethan didn't hesitate. Stop running. Everything you need is already inside you, and if you can't hear it, find someone who reminds you how to listen. The episode became the most shared one of the season, not because he was famous, but because truth always echoes louder than noise. A year later, Ava stood on the same mountaintop where it all began. The Celestial Summit Resort now held her writing retreat. It wasn't big, just 10 women, but every one of them came with a story they were afraid to tell, and every one of them left, ready to write it. She stood by the window of the same suite that once felt like a mistake and watched as the snow fell quietly over the pines. Ethan walked in, handed her a hot drink, kissed her forehead. Ready? He asked. Always, she said. In that moment, she knew. Some stories don't follow a perfect plot. Some start in chaos, in missteps, in lost luggage and wrong reservations. But sometimes, the best nights of your life don't come from planning. They come from surrender. From meeting someone not when you're ready, but when you're real. Ava never did go back to the life she had before, because the one she built after was better than any ending she could have imagined.